And I don't know what it was at the moment, if it was the energy behind those words, but I suddenly entered this state of bliss that was so overwhelming that I started to bawl. And I was crying and crying and crying, but with so much joy. And I remember when I opened my eyes and looked around the bathroom, I suddenly entered the best way I can describe it is a super conscious state of being where I felt at one with everything around me. And I'm talking. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I've been guided to share my personal awakening story to oneness. And this is not just as a way for those of you new to me to get to know a little bit of my background, but this is the premise for my channel, why I even share my messages on this channel to begin with. So this is for those of you who embrace a unity consciousness and oneness and seek to know and embody and become more and more the fully integrated divine essence of who you really are. Now, this moment of awakening happened back in 2014. And at the time of this recording, it's now 2025. So you can see how long it took me to fully integrate and do the work to heal and transform and allow the cycles of death and rebirth to take place. It does not have to take that long for anybody. For some people, it can happen in an instant. And for others, it takes time to fully embody this knowing of such a pure, blissful, high vibrational energy. And I believe a part of our work is to release what is blocking us from that so that we can allow the capacity, that we can build the capacity and the spiritual muscle to even embody this energy. Because this is not the norm for all of us who have been conditioned to think we are anything less than that. So I want to start with a little bit of my background that led up to this moment of awakening. And like many of you who are also healers or chain breakers or called to be generational healers in this lifetime, you're going to notice some of these themes in your story as well. So I was born into a family pattern of toxic codependency and narcissism, a lot of abuse, neglect, and abandonment in many different forms, and a lot of spiritual, religious oppression as well. What I mean by that is I was born into um, a belief system that you must obey a certain set of rules and conform to it, otherwise you will be eternally damned and punished. I know you already know what I'm talking about. Or on the flip side, you must obey and conform in order to be rewarded. And that energy was so rooted in fear and toxicity. And in fact, even as a child, I knew that it was not what love really is, that it was not what God really is. But I didn't know what love was or what God was. I just knew that this feeling that I felt, this animosity, this rage, this anxiety, this volatility was not it. So early on, in my adolescence, I yearned to know what love really was. I just had this quest to seek love and to just find what God meant to me, because I couldn't take it, any of it on and buy into the belief system that my family was projecting onto me at that time. So, of course, as I grew up, I simply perpetuated all of these patterns unconsciously, repeating the same toxic relationships, and every person I allowed to enter my life. These were my friendships, um, even in my workplace as an adult, with my colleagues, with my bosses, and especially in all of my romantic relationships. So it wasn't until an event happened in one of my major relationships, I call this the breakdown moment, where I experienced a deep sense of deceit and betrayal. But so much of that had already been happening that this was the last straw for me. And I remember feeling a sense of suffocation in my soul, as if I was dying inside. I remember I couldn't breathe. Possibly I was having a panic attack. But I just knew I need to get physically out of this situation and I need a spiritual healing now, or else I will not be able to survive going on like this. So I remember Googling spiritual healing retreat, and I was led to a retreat on Maui where the next day they were able to take me in and created a one-on-one experience for me for the weekend. And in that experience, there were so many magical things that happened, but one exercise was the catalyst to this profound awakening that completely changed my life. And that in that exercise, I learned how to practice mirror work. Now, this is the same mirror work that is coined by Louise Hay, for those of you who are familiar with her work. But my retreat facilitator first guided me to close my eyes and imagine that I was looking into the mirror. And then she asked me, with my eyes closed, to imagine looking into the mirror and just say, I love you, and see what happens. So when I closed my eyes and did that, what I saw in the reflection back to me was me just sticking my tongue out to me, like saying, this is so stupid, pretty much like shaming myself. So when I told her that, she said, okay, that simply tells you where you are right now in your relationship with you. So she then invited me to practice that on my own with a mirror back at my hotel room. So the next morning I woke up and I decided to give it a try. I still did on the inside think it was a very stupid practice at the time. But I remember standing in front of my bathroom mirror. I had just woken up. And the first thing I did was like, oh my God, I look so ugly. I was pointing out all the flaws on my face, my nasty bed hair, and all the things. And so I walked out of the bathroom. But as soon as I did that, I felt this energy nudge me back in on my shoulder and put me right in front of the mirror. And for some reason, I felt compelled to stay there. So I just looked into my eyes and I just allowed myself to gaze there into my eyes for a moment. And I felt so uncomfortable and I so badly wanted to leave, but something told me to just stay with it. And I don't know if a minute or two passed, but I stayed with that discomfort. And suddenly this well of emotion rose through me as I began to start crying. And in that moment, out of my mouth, I heard myself speaking these words to me as I looked into my eyes, but I wasn't thinking those words. And I heard myself and saw myself saying into my eyes, I love you, Linda. You have done nothing wrong. I have been here with you all along. Thank you for coming to know who I am. And I don't know what it was at the moment, if it was the energy behind those words, but I suddenly entered this state of bliss that was so overwhelming that I started to bawl. And I was crying and crying and crying, but with so much joy. And I remember when I opened my eyes and looked around the bathroom, I suddenly entered the best way I can describe it is a super conscious state of being where I felt at one with everything around me. And I'm talking the furniture. I touched the furniture and I felt like I was the furniture. I entered this state of awe and I walked around my hotel room like, like looking around at how beautiful and magnificent everything felt to me. Touched the bed, I touched the desk, I walked out to the door, looked over the patio, looked into the trees, and I felt at one with every single little thing. And I just remember being in this state of bliss that just moved me into this state of awe and joy that there was a part of me that didn't understand what was happening, but I knew that it felt so right and so true and so good. And I remember just staying with this, and where I was, there was just one road and I could walk across to the beach right there. And I remember walking across to the beach and looking around to see other people walking the beach. And I felt so much love for them. I felt at one with them. And I was looking at these strangers with so much love pouring out of me for them. And I was like, gosh, why do I love them so much? And I don't even know who they are. And, there was a part of me that knew that this was not normal to the everyday person. So in this state of awe, in this state of bliss, I stayed quiet. And even as I, walked about my day, I kept this to myself. But I remember the day feeling so magical until later during the day when I reflected, I realized, oh my God, this is what love really is. This is what God really is. This is the presence of my soul. And I just had this inner knowing of, I know who I am. I know who I am. That's all I got in that moment. And I remember the next day I had to go back to my retreat facilitator, and I was just lit up from the inside out. And she took one look at me and she said, Linda, tell me what happened. Like she knew something went on. And I simply looked at her and I said, I know who I am. And she just embraced me. I feel like she got it. She knew what I was saying. And I ended up telling her, what I experienced. But fast forward from that moment on, at the time, I did not know. I didn't have the vocabulary to know that that was an experience of oneness with Source or an experience of unity consciousness. But it took me the past 11 years to be okay with that happening, to face the shame and ridicule that came up when I initially tried to tell that story to people, at the time that it happened, to dive into this calling as a light worker, the mystic's journey, to dive into to the ethereal realm and to pull from that source energy through different modalities of healing, working with angels or guides, with intuition, with this sensitivity that allows us to tap in to this source energy. And of course, that the toxic relationships in my life had to fall away. The career that was no longer serving me had to fall away. The attachments I had to people and my birth family had to fall away. So over the years, I've had so many death and rebirth cycles that have allowed me to release any shame or any doubt that I had around that experience. And of course, with other teachers along the way that supported that, for example, like Michael Beckwith, who teaches oneness with God, like the Unity churches, who embrace many paths to God and unity consciousness, or people like Abraham Hicks, who teaches about our inner being and that we are extensions of this source energy. It really gave me the time to fully integrate this in my body, because initially I had escaped and I wanted to be in the state of bliss, detaching and negating or spiritual bypassing. So as you know, we must be willing to fully integrate and face both the dark and the light within us to embody and embrace all of who we really are. So now over time, as I've learned how to anchor this knowing here on earth in my physical body and allow myself to be fully present here and now on earth in this body, it's allowed me to face everything that I encounter from the energy of love, meaning that I am able to now practice embracing my flaws with love, embracing my fears with love, no longer needing to negate or repress anything. And this to me is what I call spiritual liberation or soul liberation, which I believe is my personal mission and passion in helping others to do the same for themselves. So for those of you who resonate with this journey and may have even have had your own awakening similar to this, or glimpses of this state of bliss and oneness and pure divine knowing, I'm hoping that this encourage you to continue your own revelations on your path in any way that you are divinely guided. And on this channel, I will offer to you a plethora of so many ways that I have learned and practices that I have integrated in my life, and also for the healing of others as well, to remember who you really are, to do the work to heal, to embody, to evolve, to transform, and to simply allow this divine essence of who you really are, of who we all really are, to be set free. It is time. You have been called to this message for a reason. And if this touched you in any way, I invite you to share this with someone else that you think may benefit. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.